this is the thing that I have seen derail more races than anything else, because you all know that as Ironman triathletes, you're all A-types. You're all going to get your workouts done. All your friends think you're crazy. You get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do your long run before work. You do your 7-hour, 8-hour, 9-hour breaks, whatever it is. But you're not paying enough attention to hydration and nutrition. So, as I go through the presentation, hopefully you'll come to understand that specificity is where it's at. And when I was studying exercise physiology, my professor on day one said specificity, specificity, specificity. And that doesn't just apply to physical training, it applies to your hydration and nutrition as well. And as I'm going to go through, you'll see that that means duration, intensity, location, humidity, heat, cold, whatever it is. We've got to figure out what works for you at a given intensity, a given duration, and certain different weather types. So what I'll often see is that people, so here's my favorite one from when I first started and I was working with runners who would train for a marathon. They would train with one thing, which might be somewhat haphazard. If somebody put out a cooler, they might drink from it. Perhaps they'll drink in a water fountain. Maybe they're using Gatorade, maybe they're using Infinite. And then they get to race day and the race is using Accelerate. And so they're going to start drinking Accelerate. Or if you're like me, it's Gatorade and it's lemon lime, which I hate with a passion. So if I have been using whatever I've been using in training, which I can assure you is not lemon lime Gatorade, I get to race day, it's lemon lime Gatorade, I'm not going to drink it. So I've already, pretty much from the beginning, we know that my race is going to suck. Well, people are doing the same thing with Ironman, but now whatever the issues were with a marathon, they're compounded because the race is, anywhere from 2 to 4 times as long. So the first point that really bears attention is carbohydrate storage in the human body. If you figure out that between the 3 sources of stored carbohydrate, which is your muscle glycogen, your liver glycogen, and your blood glucose, we can only store around 1,200 to 1,500 calories from carbohydrates. During an hour of exercise, depending on the size of the athlete, depending on the intensity, depending on the terrain, we could burn somewhere between 450 to as much as 1,000 calories an hour. Now granted, that's not all going to be coming from carbohydrate because there's mixed source substrate usage. But you can see that if we do that, we could bonk in 1.5 to 3.5 hours. Well, no matter how fast they're getting an Ironman, they are not finishing it yet in 3.5 hours, right? So we have to supplement. Most of us, have to supplement well, sensibly for a marathon. But as soon as you start talking about an Ironman, you really need to be paying attention, and we need to keep this in mind. So the next thing is, so I said we've only got 1,200 to 1,500 on board. Well, if I'm burning 450 calories an hour, that's way more than what I can actually physiologically process, which is only about 60 grams an hour. So that's about 240 calories. Before I go any further, all of this data is coming from studies that have been done at universities, right? So the data that I have here is going to be representing an average, but obviously there's a bell curve. So the numbers that I give you are somewhere in that bell curve. A bigger guy might be able to take in more, a smaller woman might be able to take in less, but as you'll see as I go on, the important part is that you practice, right? And you figure out where you fall on that. But the average is that if we take in more than 60 grams of carbohydrate in an hour, typically it's going to lead to some stomach distress. There are some outliers on that. If you're doing an ultra marathon where you're going to be running for hours and hours and hours, you have to do so at such a low intensity that in fact your stomach can process more. But then what happens, you've been at it for such a long time, at 3 o'clock in the morning your stomach doesn't really want to process anything at all. So we need to figure out what it is, how can we maximize this number? What is my individual tolerance level at a given intensity in a given weather condition? And it's always worse in the heat. Typically we find the harder we work out, the hotter it is, the lower this number needs to be. Does that sort of make sense? Does that make sense? Good. And the reason that it's happening is our blood doesn't just supply oxygen to the muscles, it doesn't just remove waste products, it also serves to cool us. So there's a battle going on during exercise where the blood has to go to the working muscles, it absolutely has to go to the brain, but it also has to go to the skin to cool us. When you train in hot terrain, or you train, you're actually working out, you're going to sweat, and eventually you're going to lose plasma volume, and then there's a battle, right? And it's your viscera are shut off almost during exercise, so the tolerance levels go down. That's why it gets harder. The hotter it is, the harder you're working out to process your foods. So specificity, here's my favorite one. People will train at one intensity. Oh, it's my long day, so it's my aerobic day, so I'm going to go out. I'm going to go out in zone 2. And there's a guy named Asker Ukendrup, who's one of the most well-known sports nutrition guys, and he did a study that showed, I think, it showed you could eat anything you want at certain intensities. But he was looking at people who were working out at less than 75% of VO2. Most of us warm up at 75% of VO2. So you can eat anything, right? Which is again why you will see ultramarathoners in the middle of a run. They're eating pizza, they're eating hamburgers, they're eating Snickers bars, because they're working out at such a low intensity that they're not having that battle with their stomach. But so what you'll see people do is they'll go out and they'll do an aerobic run or an aerobic ride, and they're using one certain product. They're using, let's just say, they're using Infinite. It's a 250 calorie an hour mix. It's got a certain blend of electrolytes in it. But then on race day, they're working out in zone 4, much, much higher intensity. It's much hotter. And now the same nutrition strategy and hydration strategy that you've been using in training, all of a sudden it doesn't work. And you're like, well, I've been training with it for months. Why didn't it work? Well, it's because you raced at a different intensity than you trained at, and it's very, very specific. What works in zone 2 is often not so good in zone 4. Already said that. Just a little something what I've found over the years. I've been coaching iron distance and ultra distance athletes for, I don't know, 15, 16 years, and what I've come to realize is that, so who here is a sub 10 hour Ironman?
Yeah.
Who here is a sub 12 hour Ironman? Woo! All right, we got a couple of those. That's awesome. So the pros will talk about what they eat, and it's taking them about 8 or 9 hours to do the race. For the rest of us, so there were 3 of you sub 12, and I'm sure that there's a bunch of you, obviously, a lot more of you much longer than that. So what I find, because I am not a sub 12 hour Ironmaner, is that my mouth is so totally sick of whatever I have been using on the bicycle that I need to use something different on the run, because it needs to be exciting, right? It needs to be palatable. If it's the same thing, I mean, I think my teeth have grown fur by the time I get off the bicycle. I do not want any more of whatever it was. I want something different. So I will always use a different product, even if, so for different races I've used different protocols, but with different products, but I'm always using something different on the run. The other thing that I found with all of my athletes who are doing Ironman, so for a while, probably, I don't know, about 10 years ago, there was this big push for, we can put some protein in our sports nutrition, because when you're doing ultra distance, there's a 7% of our energy is coming from protein. I mean, maybe if you're doing comrades and you've been running for days, you need some protein, but typically what we find is when you put protein in your running drink or in your food, it causes an upset stomach. We can tolerate it on the bike because there's less bouncing, it's a lower VO2, and we can generally tolerate higher calorie amounts and higher liquid amounts on the bike for both of those reasons. No bouncing, we're also not generally as tired, and it's a lower VO2. The last thing as well is some people do have cast iron stomachs, but what I found is most of us do not do very well with solids on the run. And that is because, again, it's the higher VO2, so we've got even more of a decreased blood flow to the gut, and so we really sort of have to pamper it. And I find that liquids or gels or possibly chews will work better for athletes on the run, not solids. Oftentimes you'll see people consuming solids on the run, maybe some pretzels at the tail end of the Ironman, but I usually see those things are what causes problems. And you need to prepare for that on the bike around 90 minutes to 2 hours before you get off and run. Don't have any more solids, all right? Slowly decrease your calorie intake because it's going to be slightly lower for the run so that your stomach is in a good place for the run when you get off the bike. So I often hear athletes say, oh well, you know, gels don't work for me. And they've tried one gel, they've tried hammer gel. And that's it, across the board, gels don't work. Well, it's just like me and lemon lime Gatorade, which I hope nobody here is a stockholder, are they? Gatorade, lemon lime? No? Okay, good. So there's certain run drinks that I can't tolerate, there's certain gels that I can't stand, I find them too sweet. So if one doesn't work for you, don't presume that they all don't work for you. If one chew doesn't work for you, try another chew. I mean, that's what the point of training is. You know, we tend to think that training is just about, well, can I do what I need to do to finish the race physically, but we've got to keep practicing all kinds of different things, all different products. If just using, so I have a bunch of athletes who love just using Infinite. What I find is, again, they can't tolerate Infinite for the whole bike and then Infinite for the run. Some of them just change the flavor profile, that works for them. Over the years, my hydration and nutrition strategy has changed. Sometimes I just want all liquids on the bike. Sometimes I want a couple of gels or a waffle stinger, or my new treat is a payday. But see, I'm so slow, it's fine, I can eat that crap. Sometimes I have gels, Newtons, but what I figured out was, okay, I live now in Florida, most of my races are hot. What works for me here? What do I like? How do I get off the bike and feel the best for the run? And this was all about specificity. It feels fine on an aerobic ride, but when I'm doing a higher intensity workout for, say, a half Ironman, it doesn't work as well. This one I was just talking about. Where are you? Where's the guy I was just talking about? But there you are, right in front of me, yes. So some people are prolific sweaters and some people have cast iron stomachs, which you're lucky if you're one of those, if you have both of those factors going on. If you sweat a lot and you have cast iron stomach, then you're going to be able to drink more. But one of the most important things to remember is that, so we can lose somewhere between 33 and 63 ounces of liquid an hour. I am actually, you're quite lucky because there's very few prehistoric women still around on the planet, and as a representative of the knuckle draggers, I am a prolific sweater. So, I mean, I just go outside, I look at the heat, and I think I've already lost a litre. Now, what's important about that, apart from that really great image of me knuckle dragging all sweaty, is that I can't take in, I cannot replace what I've lost. And it's not just me because I'm prolific Neanderthal woman. It's because, again, our gastric system simply cannot replace what I've lost. So all of this drink to replace what you've lost is a recipe for disaster. We cannot keep up with carbohydrate use, nor can we keep up with fluid losses. So what we need to do is minimize the damage. And we figure out how much can I tolerate in certain conditions at certain intensities. So I know for myself, I can drink about 33 ounces on the bike an hour and about 24 ounces on the run. How did I figure that out? Trial and error. I just kept trying. I drank more and then I got off the bike and I was like, ooh, that didn't work. And then same thing for the run. Okay, that's good. Consider the activity. I think I already hit on this. We can tolerate a whole lot more in terms of calories and liquid on the bike than we can on the run. So typically, the calorie range on the bike is going to be around 250 calories an hour, and for the runner it's going to be around somewhere between 100, 150, 200 perhaps. Because again, now we've got the higher VO2. By this point in the race, we're probably already dehydrated. We've got that battle going on for cooling, blood going to the muscle, blood going to the viscera. So we've kind of got a baby the stomach. if you did well on the bike, if you stayed on top of your hydration and nutrition on the bike, and you managed your intensity appropriately, you're going to be okay with only 100 to 150, 200 calories on the run. But you have to manage all of those things. Let's see. Yes, I already covered that. Taper off. So, yeah. Oh, set a timer. So this is numero uno. Who here has a Garmin or a Sunto or a Polar watch? Does everybody know how to set the timer, the recurring timer? Okay, so I normally swear at this point, but I'm not going to. So I remember I bought a new fancy piece of equipment, and I went to my bike shop and I said, well, how do I make it do this? And they said to me, RTFM. Do you know what that means?
Yeah.
Read the effing manual. Right, so for all of you with those watches that cost about $495, read the manual and figure out how to set a 10-minute recurring timer. Because that is going to keep you healthy. That is going to keep you on your hydration program. It's going to help you remember to drink. The other thing that I do for every long distance race on the bike is I write out, here's my plan, hour 1. I'm having 250 calories of infinite. Hour 2, I'm going to have a gel and water. Hour 3, and it's written out. Because who here has endurance brain? 5 hours on the bike, and you're like, how long have I been on the bike? What did I have last hour? Where am I going? Who am I? So I write it out, and I actually include what I'm going to do on the run, because all the way through the race, I'm going to be looking down at that, and it's going to help me remember when my brain goes to pieces at the tail end of the run. Because one of the other things that happens, right, as we get glycogen depleted, the brain only runs on glucose. And as we get glycogen depleted, it don't work as well. So that's really, really important. Also, the night before the race, I write it all out again, because it's having that visual access to it. Here's what I'm doing. Hour 1, hour 2, hour 3. I write out what I'm having for breakfast, when I'm having it, where I'm getting it, how much I'm eating, so that you don't have to figure anything out on race day. Consider the environment. So for us, we're kind of lucky in one way, because the biggest issues come. So I had a client who lived up in Chicago, and she was getting ready for St. Anthony's, which happens April or May. It's already hot here, right? In Chicago, I think they're still under 3 feet of snow. I mean, so she's coming down from a cold and dry environment to race in a hot and humid one. And unless she acclimates and figures out one, she has to acclimate. So one of the coolest things, this is an aside, one of the coolest things that happens as we acclimate to high temperatures and humidity is our plasma volume increases. And the reason that it increases is because we are going to sweat more, we are going to sweat sooner, and we are going to sweat a more pure liquid. So it has less electrolytes in it, basically. We're not going to have the same kind of sodium losses. But in order to get those benefits, you have to train in the heat. And it takes about 10 to 14 days to do it. So how would you do that in Chicago? Any ideas?
One side.
I don't know why I asked that question. You don't have this. Run around. Can't hear you. Run around in the sauna, pass out, vomit. Yeah. Or you can do. I think you've gone off.
Hello.
Did that green light go off on the bottom?
Yep. All right, it's just me. I'll get it back to you. All right, cool. So what you can do, it's not a whole lot of fun, and people will think you're even weirder than just being an Ironman triathlete, is you're going to get on the treadmill with a heater in front of you, a woolly hat, long clothes, gloves, and you're going to sweat. Yeah, it's miserable. The bike, if you've got a trainer, you're going to train on your bike in the heat. But it's a 10 to 15% increase in plasma volume. That is a huge, huge bonus coming to train in the heat. But then what she also needs to do, my athlete in Chicago, is figure out, because you can tolerate one thing in the cold and something else, because basically the intensity goes up, your heart rate's going to go up, your gastric emptying is going to go down, your blood flow to the gut is going to go down. She needs to figure out what can she eat and drink in the heat at a given intensity, so that when she comes to St. Anthony's, she's ready. Now I know St. Anthony's is just an Olympic, but we've still got to figure out how we're going to do it. If you're living, so now the real fun part comes, right? If you If any of you ever move somewhere cold and then you're going to train for a hot race and you've got to sit on your trainer for 8 hours, 6 hours in a woolly hat. Anyway, we don't have to worry about that because we all live here. Dry races. So we had a point earlier on, oh well, we don't sweat as much in a dry race. Is that true or false? False. Right, exactly, good, my work here is done. So it's false because yeah, we do sweat, but it evaporates, right? Because the environment is dry. So the problem with a dry race is, whether we realize it or not, when we train in the heat and the humidity here, the fact that we're sweating, like me, Neanderthally, right, just sweat just dripping off you, is a bit of another reminder that, oh, I need to stay hydrated. Well, I did Ironman Arizona, damn it. Thank you.
Sorry, it does sound better.
It does sound better. Yeah, so I did Ironman Arizona. It's totally dry. And if I hadn't had my little 10-minute timer that everybody makes fun of me when I ride with my roadies, I wouldn't have stayed hydrated because I came off the bike totally dry. So yes, needs to be rote behavior, so time is not. Oh, so the only time that it is slightly different in the cold weather, you're probably not going to be sweating as much, and so you can adjust it. It's difficult for us. We can't train in the cold weather. So I just had 3 athletes go up to Canada. Did anybody hear what happened to Ironman Canada? It was miserable. It's my breath.
Get it back there.
It's happening. Okay, so, oh, I didn't like that at all. Okay. I might not be able to work with this at all. Let's see, totally forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah.
So she said come this way, it helps.
Ironman Canada.
I thought it was backwards the other way.
Alright. Yeah, Ironman Canada. So we trained here, they went up to Ironman Canada. It was approximately 40 degrees. It was torrential rain all day. So now, interestingly, when you train in the cold, we use 5 to 6 times as much carbohydrate as a substrate as you do in the heat. Well, so that's going to change how you eat and drink, right? To a degree, because we still can't replace what we use. But then the other thing that happened, it's a very hilly race, right? So everybody was praying for the hills because you're warm on the hills and then you're freezing cold on the descents. And then the other thing on the descents, it's windy, so you're shivering. Now your upper body is tight, you're trying to control the bike. I mean, it was just a horrible, horrible race. But there's no way really that we can, there's a lot of studies that have been done to say, well, can we cold acclimate? Not really. We really can't. We can heat acclimate. We can perhaps mentally acclimate. So what my athletes found when they looked at the results is a lot of the people who finished ahead of them actually lived there and trained in that stuff, and so they're mentally prepared for it. But they were also clothingly prepared for it, which makes a difference. So the sweat rate. So I've seen so many articles that have said, oh, figure out your sweat rate and replace what you lose. If you take anything from today's talk, we can't replace what we lose. Don't try to replace what you lose. You're going to get sick. But this part, figuring out your sweat rate, is really important actually for recovery, which I'm going to talk about later. But basically, you take your pre-weight naked, you take your post-weight naked again, toweled off, so that we're not counting the sweat in your clothes or the sweat on your body. You add in the fluid you took in during activity, and then that's going to give you your individual sweat rate, and then you can figure out how much you need to drink post-workout. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, so here's an example. I lost 1.5 pounds, 24 ounces of sports drink, so 1.5 times 16 gives you this. So totally, I lost 48 ounces. But then I come back to this point, well, if I can only process 33 ounces, am I going to take in 48 during it? No, but afterwards, I do need to replace that fluid that I lost. I do need to replace this 1.5 pounds of fluid that I lost, and so I'm going to drink 16, and I'm going to drink 24 ounces of electrolyte enhanced fluid to replace that loss, so that I'm ready for the next day's exercise. So considering the duration, when do we need to take in supplemental calories for all of you training for Ironman pretty much anytime you go out the door? But under 60 minutes and under, there's no physiological benefit to training with supplemental calories. That guy Wittenberg that I mentioned earlier, he actually did a very interesting study where he made people swill a carbohydrate drink and then spit it out. So they weren't actually taking in the carbohydrates, but they did actually notice a slight improvement in behavior, which suggests a mental link, right? Your body thinks you're getting calories in, and it's like, ooh, that's exciting. So sometimes, and I will do this for a harder run, I'm going to go out with cold sports drink just because it feels good. I don't need the calories, but it does help sometimes. For a sprint try, depending on the athlete, it can take 1 to 2 hours, sometimes longer. An Ironman, obviously 8 to 17 hours. We got to figure out what works. I know it's ad nauseum, right? Try it in training, figure out if it works for you. So as little as a 2% loss of body weight from dehydration can affect performance. And I threw out this fact earlier. So the ideal running temperature for human beings is approximately 41 to 48 degrees. Have we had that in Florida? I think there was a Tuesday, one winter, we might have had that. And any time the temperature goes up from there, there's going to be a decrement. And really this is a very, very low level idea of what that decrement is going to look like. Maybe this is for elite athletes on a 10K course. So yeah, the longer the event, the lower the intensity that you're training at, the more your stomach can tolerate, but you're going to practice it in training. Oh yeah, so this is really important as well. Small boluses right from the start. I had some athletes I ask my athletes all kinds of questions when they do their training, and one of them is, okay, for today, for your long workout, I want to know how much you drank and how many calories you took in. And there was this one guy, and he keeps writing it down, and he's like, oh, I had 24 ounces an hour, and I had 250 calories, and he's bonking. I'm like, what's going on? And he's got stomach upset, and we've tried a bunch of different things. And then finally, Dum Dum here, who's only been at this for like 17 years or something, goes, well, when are you taking it in? So he's taking it in like in 2 bouts at the half-hour mark and like at the 45-minute mark. So he's taking in this huge bolus of liquid and a huge bolus of calories. And of course he's getting an upset stomach. And of course by then he's already dehydrated. Oh, it's me.
Yeah, it's the button on the bottom. You might hit that. Hold it for 1 second and it should turn green.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
It does sound better, I know, but.
Talk loud.
So that 10-minute countdown timer, don't ignore it when it first goes off. Drink right then. Hello? It's not over here. I swear I'm not doing anything. I'm going to have some beer.
Hello. Hey, it works for me. Hello.
Well, look, it's going in and out. It's blinking.
Ooh, it's blinking. What
Let
is
me
that?
grab the guy in charge.
I'd say it's
Batteries? Okay, we're good.
So, we'll be back. He'll be back.
I hate that.
Sorry.
So you're going to start your drinking program and your eating program right from the start, and you're just going to repeat it all the way through. Do not wait until the end. The larger the bolus of food or liquid that you take in, the more likely that you're going to be upset, and also your stomach's going to be upset, and the more likely that you're already going to be in calorie deficit and you're already going to be dehydrated. And if I said we can't replace what we use, the worst thing you can do is then get behind right from the beginning. So here's what's amazing to me is, so Gatorade actually, they are the people who came up with sports nutrition, and their drink is a 6 to 8% solution, and the reason it's a 6 to 8% solution is because that osmolality, have some more beer. Okay, where was I? Yes, osmolality, easy for me to say. Can I have a vodka? Okay, so that osmolality is going to have the best gastric emptying effect. So you would think, and that's been studied a lot, right? At all different intensities, that's what's going to get across your intestinal wall the best. There are still some sports drinks out there that are at 9 and 12%. Right there, run away. Don't buy that sports drink. It's not going to work. I mean, it might work for really short events because you don't have enough time to get upset. Although at that high intensity, you could get an upset stomach. Oh, and here's one. So you've got this sports drink with a 6 to 8% solution, and then you take a gel with it. You've just kind of messed up the mix a little bit. So ideally, if you're going to use gels or bars or chews or whatever your payday of choice is, you're going to take that with water and drink your sports drink alone. Plus your mouth will appreciate it. It's like one source of sugar at one time is good. So that's what I do. I alternate. If I'm going to use something else besides a sports drink, I alternate. This one's water, this one. And I write that on my little list. Excuse me,
Magic
ma'am.
fingers, magic fingers.
Magic fingers. Let's see.
Maybe I don't know.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Maybe I need to stand over there.
Yeah, maybe come over
Wait,
here.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Let's try this. But if I stand here, I don't need the thingy.
Probably don't. Well,
Right.
that's okay, stand here.
All right, I'm going to stand here. All right, so we covered that. General points. All right, we're going back over here.
Those would be nice blanket.
Try the batteries.
So anyway, on the screen here, you can obviously, because I've been talking about sports drink, you can combine liquid and calories, and if that works for you, it is the simplest. So as I said, and I'm not on their Christmas list, I have a lot of athletes who use Infinite, and they use it because it's simple. Because of the endurance brain, they don't have to think about it, right? They set their 10-minute timer, and they just drink. They've got their calories, they've got their electrolytes, they've got their liquid, done, right? There's nothing more complicated. So that works. So real food. What's great about real food is typically, it's going to taste better. Typically, it doesn't have all the crap in it, so it's better. But how practical is it, right? I'm going to keep trying. All right, hello. So now Cliff Bar have come up with some real food mush. It's like baby food. So they've got this one that's actually quite good. Sweet potato with sea salt. They've got another one that's pizza flavor. I'm not so sure about that. I have had some people who really liked to do a boiled potato with salt on it. What's great about that for the long events is at the end, when your mouth is kind of sick of the sweet stuff and you've got the fur and a little bit of an upset stomach, the boiled potato with salt actually delivers the sodium you need, it delivers the carbohydrates you need, and it's really bland and it's very easy to get in. So she does little baby potatoes in a little plastic bag, and that works really well for her. But is real food better? Real food's better, but it has to be practicable, right? I have to be able to carry it, it has to stay fresh, I have to like it 8 hours in. So what I've said is I've made it sound like a golden rule, right? If you practice in the conditions, at the intensity, with the right mix, you're going to get to race day, you're not going to have any trouble. Not exactly. Sometimes it's still going to happen that you get an upset stomach. Perhaps you thought your race was going to take 12 hours, something happened like in Canada and the race is going to take you 14 hours and it doesn't work anymore, so then what are you going to do? Well, you're going to work with it, right? You might try what's on offer from the race, and what I hear time and again is that the flat Coke really works well. If you've already got an upset stomach, try the flat Coke. Sometimes there's chicken soup. I'm a vegetarian, that doesn't work. Sometimes it's the pretzels because again, it's not sweet, it's got the sodium, it's got the carbohydrates. However, the worst thing you can do is do too much of that. So sometimes people think they're dehydrated or they think they're bonking. Probably what happened is they overate or they overhydrated, and then to try and compensate, they then start cramming in the pretzels or cramming in the cookies or cramming in the Coke. Do it in really, really, really small boluses and see how it works. Slow down a little bit, give yourself time to get back on track. Just because we've got a plan Sometimes it doesn't work, so be prepared to try something else. Tums in your special needs bag or in your back pocket is an excellent idea, and I have had some athletes who have started a race by taking Imodium. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not suggesting that. However, if you know that you have upset stomach issues on the long races, you might want to try it, but you're going to try it in training, right? Oh. No, it's not the breasts anymore. No. So, how to figure out, so a lot of times you see people talk about, okay, well, I'm an endurance athlete, so I need 50 to 65% of my calories to come from carbohydrate. Well, it's okay, but it's really not specific enough to your training. So depending on where you are in training or what I'm doing today, you can actually tailor make your nutrition. So if it's an easy day, I only need 3 to 5 grams per kilogram of body weight. Kilogram, all the studies for some reason, even though we live in America, are done metric. Kilogram is 2.2 pounds, so when you come to figure this out, you can do it. You can make the adjustment. When it's a really long day, you're going to need this many carbohydrates, right? So it's a lot more. That's great. It's a little cheat sheet. Yeah, so what I was saying was it's specific to each training day. We don't train for 5 hours every day, and if you do, you're probably training for something other than an Ironman, or you're training too much. We've got to figure out, there's a lot of people training for the race, and they're not here actually, but there are a lot of athletes training for Ironman and they're like, oh, you know, I need to lose a little bit of weight before the race because it makes it easier on the bicycle and the run. The place that you want to cut those calories is never during training. I don't care how many articles you read about the benefits of doing your workout half-starved without having breakfast beforehand. You need your carbohydrates in there, you really do. There is a tiny little place for doing some of your workouts without carbohydrates, but we need to eat to fuel in preparation for the workout, we need to fuel during the workout, and then we need to promote recovery post-workout. Outside of those windows, you can think about dieting, and then it's really just about portion control. Consider 2-a-days, right? If you typically do all your training in the morning, but sometimes you have to split it up. What are you going to do for recovery post-workout? What are you going to do to prepare for the next workout? What are you going to do for recovery post-workout? Well, some of you, has anyone noticed that the workouts at the beginning of the week, let's say you have a rest day on Monday, the workouts on Monday and Tuesday are a little bit better, and as the week goes on, the workouts get a little weaker. What's probably happening, yes, of course, there's accumulated fatigue, but there is probably also a certain level of glycogen depletion. So within 30 to 60 minutes after every workout, we have this really nifty system that our body has come up with where we can take in 4 times the amount of carbohydrate, and when we do that with protein, our protein synthesis is also doubled. But most people are not prepared enough to hit that recovery window. And so as the week progresses, we are slowly glycogen depleted. So you've got to hit that window, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Oh yeah, so you can droop, I keep coming back to him, but one of the studies he did showed that actually when you get your carbohydrate from mixed sources like glucose, fructose, galactose, maltodextrin, each one of those sugar substrates crosses the intestinal wall with a different transporter. So sometimes you can actually get in more than 60 grams an hour. That's going to be very specific to the individual though, so if you're going to try it in training. So after, like I was saying, you're going to jumpstart recovery, during. So one of the things that I do talk about a little bit later on is whether you should train in a fasted state. There are some studies that have shown that perhaps it will help with your aerobic enzyme production. But typically what I find is that it just leads to a really crappy workout, because now you're in a fasted state, so you need the carbohydrate to have a quality workout. And then if you do it a lot, if you're constantly in a fasted state and you're not ingesting enough carbohydrates, you're going to be much more likely to get injured, you'll be much more likely to get overtrained, and you're going to have a succession of crap workouts. So I don't suggest you do it. So this one, learn specific tolerances. So this, later on, I'm going to talk about breakfast. Figure out what works for you. And on race day, we don't do anything new. And I mean from your bra to what, when, how much, and what you ate. Don't put new gloves on, don't wear new glasses, don't do anything new, but specifically do not do something new on race day. I had one athlete always eats toast, peanut butter jelly before a race, and then he heard someone in the transition area the day before the race saying, man, oatmeal is the best thing. So he had oatmeal for breakfast and he promptly lost it in the swim, and that was the end of that. So we don't, oatmeal, it's so innocuous, right? How could oatmeal upset your stomach? Well, it was new, he shouldn't have done it. All right, let's see, we already covered all of that. Ooh, this is good. Is that, wow. This is special spelling, dinners. So for the long races, you got to figure out what works for you for dinner, and pretty much it's going to be, don't do anything new, don't do anything sushi, don't do anything spicy, don't do anything with a whole bunch of fiber, and it's always going to be the same thing. Once you've figured out that brown rice, vegetables, and fish works for you, or whatever it is that you like to do, that's what you're going to do. It's not a massive dinner, you're not carbo loading all in one go, but you know what works. Most importantly, whose Ironman is out of town? Nobody? Because there's none here, so it has to be out of town. Right, so you need to figure out, where am I going for dinner? Or am I renting a place that's an efficiency and I'm going to cook my own dinner? That's always my choice. And I have my own breakfast, I have a little efficiency kitchenette. It's not up to anybody else, because I've had people who, oh yeah, the breakfast buffet is going to be open at 5, and you get there and, Noddy forgot to show up, so where's your breakfast before an Ironman? Figure out where you're going to get, what you're going to eat, how much it's going to be, what the volume of it's going to look like, and when you're going to eat it relative to when the race starts. Already covered that. So this one, I gave this to someone and they thought that what I was saying was 4 hours prior to the event, you're going to eat 4 grams of kilograms, and then in another hour, you're going to eat 3 grams, and then in another hour, you're going to, no. These are alls, right? So you've got to figure out 4 hours, I'm going to do this. So for me, I usually eat about 3 hours prior to my Ironman, and that works for me, but figure out which one you want to do. If your workout's going to be less than 90 minutes, this is really all you need to do. If it's going to be a 60-minute workout, there are plenty of athletes who go out and train without breakfast because they don't have enough time to get up early. If you find that you need more calories before even an hour-long workout, you can do it with a smoothie, you could do it with a shake. Ensure is great. It's lots of calories, easy to get in. You can take it in right before you run out the door. Typically, this is what I suggest before a race: a bottle of water, a little bit, 10 to 14 ounces right before the race. What I'll often hear people doing is that they get sports drink and then they just drink sports drink from breakfast all the way through till the race starts. I don't suggest that because of the insulin response. I'm not going to bore you too much, but basically if you're constantly taking in that carbohydrate before exercise begins, insulin is going to go into your bloodstream and suck the blood sugar out, and so then when you start the race, you're actually going to have low blood sugar. So if you're going to take carbohydrates in, do it within the 15 minutes prior to the race. And then once you start exercising, the epinephrine and the norepinephrine enter your blood system, and then the insulin is kind of turned off, and then that sugar only goes to your exercising muscles. That's your useless piece of information for today, except it's not really useless. So I already covered this. Depending on whether you're on the bike or whether you're on the run, whether you figured out which end of the spectrum you are on the hydration front. This one we haven't talked about. Somewhere I've seen as low as 400 to 800 milligrams. Some of you are really salty sweaters. You've got that cake on your sports clothes. When you finished, I would go with the higher end of the sodium. I'm also a big fan of the electrolyte tabs that have a full spectrum. So they have calcium, potassium, magnesium, and sodium being in the highest percentage, because All of those are important in cellular function and muscle contraction, so you need all of those. Okay, so this is the next one. We've decided we don't like what the race uses, so for me, it's going to be Axel gels, and it's going to be lemon lime Gatorade, and I can't use it, so I have to carry all my own stuff. How am I going to make it happen? So a fuel belt is a must. How am I going to resupply that? I can put powder in my special needs bags. I could carry a concentrated bottle, or on the bike, I can use what they call a multi-hour bottle. Is anybody familiar with those? So basically you mix, if you buy a powder, you mix multi-hour, so it could have 7 hours in your bottle. You mark off what one serving is, and then when you run through the aid station, or you ride through the aid station, you squeeze a serving into your bottle, pour cold water in and some ice preferably, and then you have a serving of liquid. You're not carrying 5 bottles of liquid all full. So it always cracks me up, right? We spend thousands of dollars to make our bike 3 grams lighter, and then we stick 5 bottles on it full of liquid, right? That makes no sense at all. So the multi-hour bottle is great. The fuel belt is great. You can put more powder in your special needs. That works really well. Of course, the bento box, you know, that fits on your top tube. You can throw electrolyte tabs in there. You can throw your Tums in there. Whatever else you need. Let's see. Okay, my favorite, because when I first started this game, I wasn't very fast, and I'm still not very fast, but I'm happy. So I would get to the aid stations, and they were out. They told me they would have gels, and they would have chews, and they would have whatever they would have, and I would get there, and they were like, too slow, gone. So, and then of course there are some races. Did anybody do Miami 70.3 in the inaugural year? Okay, so midway through the race, the aid stations, the first aid station on the run, ran out of water. So they had a brilliant idea to give people Coke, but not flat Coke, in a can. So it was a disaster. They didn't have water on the course. I've done a race where they ran out of water, but they didn't put a sign up to tell you. So I was doing a race, and one of my clients was there, and she'd lost a bottle, and I was like, oh, here, I have mine, because there's the aid station. So I give her my bottle thinking, oh, I'll get another one in a minute. It's kind of hot, so I squeeze off. I get to the aid station, like, oh, we're out of water. So it's a half Ironman, no water for the last 25 miles, no problem. So ask around, how well is the race run? Can you rely on it? If they said they were going to have what they were going to have, I still think you should take some gels with you, take your own stuff with you, just in case. Obviously, I've already said that. If you're going to use what they have on the race, make sure you practice with it. All right, recovery right away. So I said figure out what you lost in terms of fluid. So if I weighed 2 pounds more before I started, I'm going to drink 32 ounces of electrolyte enhanced fluid as soon as possible. The reason it's got electrolytes in it is obviously because I need to replace those. But if I just drink water, I'm going to pee it out really quickly. My kidneys are going to go, whoa, your blood pressure is entirely too high, I'm just going to pee it right out. So you've got to have electrolytes in it so you can hang on to it. My favorite recovery drink is actually by Recoverite. It's Hammer, but every sports drink now has a recovery shake. I love it. It's really simple. If you're training away from home, have a cooler, pre-mix your drink, keep it in ice, drink it on your way to wherever you're going. Right? Don't be the lazy triathlete. There's nothing lazy about an Ironman triathlete, but the number of times I hear, oh, I wasn't prepared for afterwards. That's just laziness. It's a lack of preparation. Figure out what you're going to drink right afterwards. Keep it in your car. And then you can get your carbohydrates, you can get a little bit of protein in that shake, for example, the Hammer Recoverite, and you're going to get rehydrated. So it's a 3-for-1. That drink needs to be a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio. And the reason for that is when you mix the protein with the carbohydrate, you up the intake of both of them. And so yes, there's a synergistic effect. So you up the intake, and then you're going to be able to increase your carbohydrate reuptake and your protein resynthesis. And so this actually works out to be about a 3-to-1. Who's that guy? Triathlete on telly. Chocolate milk. Yes. So chocolate milk does work. It's it'll work. I personally prefer the recovery shakes because it's got a broader spectrum of vitamins and minerals. And in my recovery shakes, I highly recommend that you look for one that has glutamine in it. It's going to improve muscle protein synthesis. It's going to improve your immune function, and as you get closer to race day, oftentimes ultra endurance athletes' immune function decreases, so it's really going to help with maintain immune function. Already covered that. So dehydration, I think I pretty much covered this as well. It's going to increase your heart rate because now you've got less blood trying to do more things, right? It's trying to go to the brain, it's trying to go to the muscles, it's trying to cool the body. So your heart has to increase to get that blood all around the body. Plus now your blood itself is actually thicker, so it's harder to move through the veins and the arteries. As we get dehydrated, our RPE, our rating of perceived exertion, increases. So whatever we were doing feels that much harder, and it is harder because we've got less blood going around. And generally this is when we all start getting fuzzy and we can't do basic math because now we're dehydrated, we feel really crummy. How do we check our levels of hydration? Really, it's pretty simple. Look at your pee. Not right after you've taken a B12 or vitamin C because it'll be bright orange and scary. Later in the day, all throughout the day, keep looking at your urine color, and it should look a little bit like lemon juice, right? It should be really light yellow. It shouldn't be totally clear, then you're probably overhydrated, but other than that, there's no way to tell. Or you can do a little pinch test. If your skin stays up when you pinch it, you're probably dehydrated. Sodium needs, it's pretty much like for the calories and liquid intake, you don't want to replace it all in one go. So we might lose this much in an hour, but you're really only going to supplement it with 800 milligrams. I had an interesting question from one of my athletes the other day. She went out, it was stupid hot, she lost tons of weight, and she's like, oh well, should I up my electrolyte intake? Your electrolytes are not going to stop you from losing fluid. What they're going to do is make sure that your plasma electrolyte level, sodium level specifically, is at the right level so that you don't get hyponatremic. So you've got to figure out what you can tolerate, but it's not the electrolyte supplements like the base salt or the Endurolite caps from Hammer. It's not going to stop you from getting dehydrated. So that's very important for you to remember. Yeah, basically hyponatremia, you've drunk too much, you've diluted your blood so much that your sodium levels are, hyponatremia can kill you. So it's very important. Most of the people that are in trouble are your bigger athletes, your slower athletes, your athletes who have been terrified into drinking voluminous amounts of liquid at every opportunity. Your athlete who is trying to get a preload on making sure that they're sort of hyper-hydrated before the race. We cannot hyperhydrate. We're just going to pee it out. If we just drink water the day before the race and we just keep trying to hyperhydrate, you are absolutely setting yourself up for hyponatremia. You are going to dilute your blood plasma and be low on sodium. And for the ultra events, that's just a terrible way to go into the race. What you do need to do prior to the race is make sure that you are adequately hydrated. So check your pee color. I will do water and Endurolites during the day just to make sure I don't really want the extra calories. I'm making sure that I'm taking in ample calories, but I don't want to dilute my plasma volume. So let's see, here's what we can lose, here's what we can take in. One of the things I said earlier, when you become acclimated to the heat, you sweat sooner, you sweat more, and you sweat more purely. So when you're conditioned, you're going to lose less sodium, so that's a good thing. So here's an interesting one. And before I studied exercise physiology, I went to an Ironman and they weighed me, and I was like, why are they weighing me? It's kind of rude. I don't want to stand on the scale in front of all these people. But the reason they weigh you is so that if something happens on the course and you look like perhaps you're dehydrated, of course, if I'm dehydrated, I'm going to weigh less. But if I were overhydrated, which is what's going to happen with hyponatremia, I am probably going to be the same weight, or even worse, I'm going to have gained weight. So now these are the symptoms of the two things, complete polar opposites with very similar symptoms, except for this one. So if I'm dehydrated, what are they gonna do? They're gonna give me fluids, right? Which if I'm suffering from hyponatremia is absolutely gonna push me over the edge. So that's why they weigh you, and that's why it's another good thing when you're out, you should weigh yourself prior to the workout and post-workout. And if you gain weight, unless you stop for a burger and fries on the way, you're probably drinking too much. Okay, that's that. Carb loading, I get questions about this all the time. The biggest mistake that I see ultra athletes make is, kind of pigging out in the final days. And really, we're all on the taper, right, in the final week before the race. So in fact, we're doing less. We don't want to go on a diet, but we do need to bring down our caloric intake commensurate with how much exercise we're doing. But as we bring down that caloric intake, we increase the percentage of that intake coming from carbohydrates. So our calorie total goes down, but the percentage then of the carbs goes up. For an Ironman, probably you should start doing that about 3 days out. Carbo loading, like I said, isn't just a giant dinner. It's very sensible eating like you've been doing the whole time, but making sure that your muscle glycogen is fully loaded, because remember, that's what I said. That is a very, very finite amount. We need to go into race day with that fully loaded. Right. That's it. Oh, weight gain in the taper. So, one of the things that often happens during training, like I said, is probably throughout training and throughout the week, we're becoming a little bit glycogen depleted. We're training ridiculous amounts. We might be losing weight over time. Now we come to the taper. We're doing less. We're glycogen loading. Oh my God, I put on 3 pounds. Well, one of the things that happens when you store glycogen is it gets stored with water. So 2 things are probably happening in the taper, right? You are glycogen loaded and you've been in a glycogen depleted state probably for quite a while. You are also probably adequately hydrated, whereas you've probably been in a chronic state of dehydration. So now you're fully loaded, not from the beer. You're fully glycogen loaded, you're fully water loaded, so you may well put on some weight. Don't panic, don't start cutting back, right? Just understand that that's going to come with it. Now you put on 5 or 8 pounds, you need to look at, man, was I really that depleted before, or are you just eating the same amount as you've been eating with, 18 hours of training and now you're doing 5. So it's a good idea to keep a food log. I already talked about that. I already talked about, oh no I didn't. Okay, so I did talk about it to some degree. I said, oh yeah, you'll see all these studies and they'll go, yes, okay, so endurance athletes, 65% coming from carbohydrate, 25% coming from protein, and the rest coming from fat. The problem with the percentages is it really doesn't adjust for how much you specifically are exercising in a certain phase. So I already talked about this. You've got the cheat sheet a few pages back. Generally, it looks like studies are showing that 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of protein per day is adequate, and the rest of it's going to come from fat, preferably unsaturated fat. Okay, so that is pretty much the bulk of the presentation for tonight. But then I gave you just a bunch of other stuff that you can have a look at. I don't think there's anything in there that. So one thing, sugar in your diet, outside of fruits and outside of your training substances, ideally you should be getting only about 10% of your diet from added sugar. The rest of it, and I'm not talking about fruits, right? Fruit is, yes, it is sugar, but it's unprocessed sugar and it's healthy sugar. So, but outside of that, the sugar that you add to things or the sugar that comes in the drinks outside of your training stuff, try and stay away from that. Here's an important one, glycemic index, because I was talking here about it, can be lowered with the addition of fat, protein, or fiber. So you know, just your general calories in the macronutrients, that's that bit. Oh, and then just stuff about vitamins, and the rest of that I'll just let you read on your own. And basically, I'm a proponent of healthy and real food versus the processed stuff, and that's just some reasons why you shouldn't do it. It causes inflammatory disease. liquor and drinkies. So pretty much one drink prior to your race the night before is probably okay. I always think 2 is too many, even though that the studies have shown that 2 drinks probably isn't going to decrease your performance. But one of the most important things that alcohol will do, which you also need to keep in mind, because I have some athletes who are incredible. They train like the pros, but they also party like the pros. And they can put away some drinks and then go out and train the next day. And the number one thing they've got to look out for is where to go. Oh yeah, this one. So it messes with your antidiuretic hormone, and basically it leads to dehydration. So if you've been on a bender and you're going out for a long one the next day, you're really going to have to make sure that that night with your drinks you take in some water, and the next day you've got to stay on top of your hydration levels. And so this is the most important part, right? Figure out what works for you all the way through training. Write it down, keep a food log, figure out what works for you. Figure out your sweat rate in various conditions, and that's it. Thank you, everybody. I should have the data on that, and I think the last time I saw anything on it, it was probably only 9%, but it gets the attention like a shark attack, right? There's actually not that many of us killed by sharks, but when it happens, it's astounding. So percentage-wise, it's not a huge percentage. How many people, is it still on? Still on. Oh, okay. What's the occurrence or the incident rate of hyponatremia? And so it's not a very high rate in the scheme of things, but when it happens, it's a big deal, and it's not to overstate it. It can cause death. So, you know.
So what are the conditions of a bonk, I think was your word?
So a bonk, basically what bonking means traditionally is that you have used up all your glycogen. Now, having said that, you'll often see people doing an Ironman and on the run at mile 15 they're walking and they look like they're going to quit, and then 2 miles from the finish line they can hear the finish line and then they start running. So was it a bonk at mile 15? Probably not, but they were really tired and they probably were glycogen depleted. But so it sort of brings me on to another point, that the mental aspect of your training also really needs to be worked on as well. But basically what a bonk means is you're glycogen depleted. So remember way back at the original slide I was talking about we only have about 1,200 to 1,500 calories available. So I've often heard a marathon described as a 10K race with a 20-mile warm-up. And when is it that you see most people hitting the wall? It's around the 20-mile mark, which pretty much correlates with, oops, I used up all my glycogen. And so that, where you hit the wall and like you were run along comfortably at an 8.5 minute mile, you just blow up and you're like, oh my God, I can barely drag at 12. That's a bonk, pretty much.
Like it's always like cramping or...
No cramping, something else. It really is. So basically you've run out of energy substrate. You've used it all up. I cannot run at this intensity anymore or cycle at this intensity. I mean, I would imagine that all of you on one training session or another have been going along and everything's great, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I can't go another half an hour. I certainly can't go at that pace. I'm going to be forced to slow down. You probably bonked. You probably didn't ingest enough carbohydrate. Or the other one is you were working too hard, but that is also going to lead to you used your carbohydrate stores up. Because the higher the intensity that you're working at, sorry, I have to put it down for a minute. Okay. There's a crossover point, right? So generally below about 75% of your VO2 max, you're predominantly going to be using fat for energy. As soon as you get over that 75%, now there's a greater and greater and greater percentage of carbohydrate that you're using as your energy substrate. There's a crossover point, right around 75%. So here I'm using all fat, I go to this intensity, and now all of a sudden it shifts to carbohydrate, which is why it's so important that you manage your intensity as well, because the higher the intensity you're working at, the more carbohydrate you're going to be using. We cannot replace what we use, so if you're working too hard and we can't replace it for a long event, a bonk is absolutely going to happen. Does that make sense? If you keep your intensity low enough and you resupply often enough, you can keep going somewhat indefinitely. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You didn't talk too much about the heart rate. I guess what's your heart rate supposed to be?
Because, so there's a friend of mine who, we're the same
talk.
age. We're the same age. We're pretty much the same fitness. And I would gauge that by when we ride in the same conditions together, we would describe a similar effort with the same RPE. We have similar times for things. We run at a similar pace for a given effort. But when we do it, her heart rate is 20 beats higher than mine. Does that mean I'm fitter than hers? No. It means her heart rate is 20 beats higher than mine. So where we get led astray is when you go to the gym and they have that stupid chart that I just want to rip off the wall that says, here's your fat burning zone, and it's a heart rate of 135 to 155. So that whole heart rate algorithm crap came from some guy in a university. You needed to come up with some algorithm to say, this is what your heart rate is. It works for somewhere to 50 to 60% of the population. And the rest of us, it's got nothing to do with the price of fish at all, nothing. So I don't talk about heart rate because it's going to be different for everyone, right? And it's also going to be different. So for me, running an 8-minute mile, I'm probably going to pass out in about 5 minutes and my heart rate's going to be 175. For you, an 8-minute mile might be an aerobic workout and your heart rate's 135. I don't know anything, right? So if someone just tells me my heart rate was 175, okay, I'm wearing a blue shirt. Yeah.
Is there a relationship between your heart rate and your sweat rate and any of the loss of everything?
So the important part there is, what does your heart rate mean? So for me, so two points. Your heart rate on the bike is typically going to be about 10 beats lower than your heart rate on the run for a given intensity, right? So you've got two different heart rates. So you don't use one heart rate for both of those to figure out how hard you're going. What your heart rate is going to tell you specific to you and to you is, so for me, when I'm running at threshold on the run, my threshold heart rate is 165. On the bike, it's 158. So what that tells me is, if I continue to run at 165 for more than an hour, I'm going to blow up. And I'm also going to be using a tremendous amount of glycogen. I'm going to be sweating more because it's a very high intensity for me, threshold, right? I'm going to have less blood flow to my stomach. So I'm going to have more trouble processing whatever I'm taking in and the liquid I'm taking in. So what your heart rate's going to tell you is the intensity at which you need to do certain races. So for an Olympic, let's say, if you're a fast Olympic athlete, you're going to be near threshold. For a half Ironman, you're going to be around a tempo range, slightly lower than your threshold. And for an Ironman, you're going to be fully aerobic for the whole thing. And so for me, a fully aerobic effort is going to be a 135 heart rate. So it's all relative. So you need to figure out in training, here's what my Ironman heart rate looks like on the bike. For me, my Ironman heart rate is 120 to 125 beats per minute. I know that I'm as aerobic as I can be, and I can do this all day if I fuel right and I hydrate right, and conditions allow. So that's that. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So you need to figure it out. And the best thing you can do is do threshold tests for the bike and for the run. And then after you've done that test and you've figured out what your threshold is, constantly evaluate it. Okay, so based on my threshold, I think this is my aerobic range. Go out and do your long ride at that range and say to yourself all the way through it, how does this feel? Does this feel like an RPE 5 that I could do all day? Or does it feel harder? Or does it feel easier? And what's happening with my performance? For those of you, who here has a power meter? Okay, it's a very teeny tiny percentage. But if you have a power meter and you use Training Peaks, there's a really great tool, but I won't go into this because everybody's here. You can email me, I'll tell you how to use it. Yeah.
Stay on that heart rate thing.
Yeah.
I have not usually high heart rate. Does that higher heart rate?
Nope. It's absolutely individual. So my friend, she and I run at the same pace. Hers is 20 beats higher than me.
Does that mean that her body needs more to fuel?
No, but, well, it might, but it's really not related to her heart rate, because for her, So her 175 is equal to my 155. It's just what can she tolerate. So what your heart rate is telling you is where you are intensity-wise, right? And so you're just paying attention, like, yes, that is a higher heart rate than most people have at an aerobic effort, but it's kind of immaterial. What matters is how much liquid and how much fuel can you ingest at that rate in training, apply it to races.
If that higher heart rate is putting more demand on the system, consuming more, and you can only replace X amount, isn't that
No, because it's relative, right? So your 175 feels the same to my heart as my 155, right? So relatively speaking, we're working at the same intensity. It just happens that your heart does it more. Now, if I am, so my father-in-law just had a cardiac bypass, right? His heart rate at 175 is in a lot of trouble, right? Because he's got to keep it really low. But because unless I see you've always been at 135 and all of a sudden you're at 175, then we've got a problem. But it also would indicate that if it's higher on race day, it means you're not racing the way you trained. So don't get stuck on the number. Think about it in terms of relative to where your threshold heart rate is. That defines all of your training and your racing zones. And then you just keep dialing it in, okay? At this heart rate, I have found that I can drink 30 ounces an hour and I can take in 250 calories. Doesn't matter if it's if my racing heart rate is 175 and that's my aerobic heart rate, that's what I'm doing. So I think you're sort of getting stuck on the, gosh, everybody I know's heart rate is 20 beats less than that. Oh well, doesn't mean it, because if you're going to worry about it being a higher work rate, then you're kind of in that camp of we only have a certain number of heartbeats in our life.
It's been normal for me my whole life.
Ding, 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 ding. Normal for you your whole life. End of story. It's relativity, right? Yep.
So this question you might answer with, didn't you just pay attention to the last hour, Linda? And if you do it, if I told you for the last hour, you'll be okay. But I watch these guys train during the day, and then they come in and they swim in the evening, and they cramp up the last 20 minutes of an hour swim workout. What words of wisdom do you have for them to try to avoid cramping up?
So there have been tremendous amounts of studies done on what causes cramping. And despite all of the studies that have been done, there has been no definitive study that says take in this amount of electrolytes, drink this amount of liquid, and you won't cramp anymore. There have been some studies that have shown there is some, incidence of cramping if you're dehydrated and if you're sodium depleted. There have been some studies, and this is the one that I see often, is that if you're not appropriately trained for the activity, so what we typically see is early season, there's more cramping, right? Because you're coming out of the off season, you're not really in shape, you're overloading the system a little bit more than it's used to, and we're slightly more prone to cramping, which really, there have been studies done, but it also typically sees, if you were to poll all of you guys, I bet we'd see more cramping at the beginning of the season. So what that brings me to is, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I've seen it so often. People train at one intensity, they're training for an Ironman, and then they get to race day, and it's very exciting, and we're very rested, and we're very tapered, and there's people in transition, and there's all these other athletes, and there's that person who I said I'd never let beat me again, and all of a sudden, we're racing 10, 15, 20 beats higher than we were in training. Ostensibly, we are now at an event that we are totally untrained for. Training as you approach race day looks like race day. And if your race day doesn't look like the training you've been doing in the last 2 months, you're in a boatload of trouble, and I guarantee you're going to cramp and bonk and vomit, and it's going to be miserable. So, back to your question. So the next thing, we've got masters in the evening, we've trained in the morning, we've worked in the middle. Goes back to one of the other slides in there. We have to fuel for the first workout, fuel during the first workout, recover from the first workout, eat appropriately in the middle, fuel for the second workout, fuel during the workout, fuel after the workout. We have to do all of that with our hydration status as well. And what I do when I know I'm going to train twice in a day, I'm going to take an Endurolite or a base salt or a whatever electrolyte supplement you like in between my 2 sessions, so I can drink, I can stay hydrated, I can keep my electrolyte levels appropriate. Yeah, so I'm going to be fueled and I'm going to be hydrated. So you have to, every day that you wake up, you know what you're going to do. You know what you're going to do in the morning. You know what you're going to do in the middle. You know what you're going to do in the evening. You need to be prepared for that. You can't just kind of go, well, I didn't have anything with me. Okay, then your workouts are going to suck. Don't bitch about it.
What about the thought, and it might be a recent thought,
Yeah.
of training dehydrated so you can race dehydrated?
No.
Because there's recent science on it.
Oh, I'm incorrect then. Yes.
Well, I don't know.
Why don't you tell me?
I don't know. I mean, there's recent discussions, I would say, on it.
So before Gatorade Institute came up with the whole Gatorade,